Now, should the Nigerian government set out a plan to require young people to take part in a form of national military service in place of the current National Youth Service Corps scheme? Well, according to the advocates, the proposed scheme would not be conscription, but people would be legally required to either join the armed forces for a period or enroll in a year-long military training scheme. Subsequently, they would spend 4 years on a reserve list, meaning they could be called up to fight at short notice. As of now, the plan is not fully fledged, but if it gains popularity, a public inquiry would be tasked with coming up with the details. Those who support the plan say it would help foster a national spirit and dramatically beef up Nigeria's armed forces at a time when this country is experiencing major security problems. They say it would allow young people to learn about logistics and civil response operations, diverting them away from unemployment and crime and igniting a passion for a future career in the armed forces. But those who oppose it say it could end up being extremely dangerous for Nigeria. And those in the middle suggest getting a small group of young people to take part in a pilot scheme as a preliminary test. So, is replacing the NYSC scheme with military service a good or a bad idea? Well, to find out what they think about this, I'm joined now in the studio by two security experts, the National Security Consultant, Policy Analyst, and former Air Force Group Captain Sadiq Shehu, and the Security Consultant and retired U.S. Army Captain Bish Johnson. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Let me start with you, Group Captain Sadiq Shehu. What do you make of this suggesting that young people in Nigeria should be required to do military service?
Okay, thank you very much. First, just like you stated in your introduction, it is good to understand when you talk about this issue, you are talking about two concepts. There is the concept of compulsory military service, which you could call conscription or draft, as they call it in Korean. And then there is the concept of compulsory military training. The first one, the conscription, it means you are going to serve. Whereas the second one, you know, it's that you will get the skills. And then, of course, you are in reserve. You may eventually serve, you may not serve. It is hard. So, in Nigeria, if we want to bring it to our context here, for a long time, we have been talking about, in fact, it's a common knowledge that we do not have enough military. That has been said, even though we are doing very little about it. I have served in several committees where the issue of reserve for the Nigerian Armed Forces has been talked about. If you look at certain section in the Nigerian Constitution, in the Armed Forces Act, there was where the word reserve, you know, was that there's a foundation laid that Nigeria could eventually do a reserve. But beyond that, there's nothing concrete. Several committees have sat, and one of the areas they observed or they recommended in some of the reports I have seen, if at all we are going to have a reserve, where those reserves are going to be sourced is the national NYSC. But this is not mentioned whether in the NYSC or anywhere, but it's a suggestion from some committees.
Yes.
So again, it's good to know that that way of bringing people into the military, it has several advantages for the individual, for the society, for the country. For the individual, in advanced societies, there are people who just go into the military, you know, purposely to spend just a few years because they admire the discipline, the leadership, and other skills. They go on their own. I'm going to serve for 3 or 4 years. I want the military experience. So the expectation is that anybody who serves in the military, because of the regimented way of life, you are certainly going to come out a better person, discipline-wise. You will get some leadership skills. That's at the individual level. At the societal level, especially in a society like ours, I don't want to be immodest, but the typical military man, even in Nigeria, is more attuned, you know, to Nigeria's realities, to Nigeria's, you know, the different languages, ethnic groups. He can mix easily because in the military you are based, you are forced, you know, by nature to work with people that are outside your area, outside your belief systems and everything. So along the way, you become a better citizen, you can integrate more. And if the citizen can integrate more, of course, again, that's a benefit to the country and to the society. At the national level, again, another issue is that you never know when war is going to come knocking. If you have such people that are trained, even though they are not fully in uniform, if you need them, that's what is happening in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Ukraine, you can call them at any time. With due respect, I would like to say it's like a half-cooked rice. You have it stored. When you want to eat, you are very hungry now, you can come and bring it. Rather than picking somebody who never had any service, that's when you
well, now you're making me hungry by talking about half-boiled rice.
Yes.
But that's a good opening. Let me come to you, Captain Bish Johnson. Thank you very much for joining us. There's talk of national military service, replacing the National Youth Service Corps scheme. What do you reckon?
Well, I wouldn't subscribe to the idea of replacing the National Youth Service. The National Youth Service can be in place, but we can reform it. Instead of them spending 21 days in orientation camp where they are being trained by the man of war, we can extend it to maybe 6 months or more for them to go through, full-fledged basic
as part of the NYSC.
Exactly.
Yeah,
full-fledged basic military training so that they can understand, some basic military skills. Look, Charles, the era where countries have standing forces of 1 million, 2 million, 3 million is over. Because as the resources of countries dwindle, countries will have to adjust to be able to meet up other obligations. For example, let me tell you, 50% of U.S. armed forces are members of the reserves. They are ordinary citizens. What they do is they take them to basic training. They assign them to what is called selective reserve units. Each unit specializes in a particular field. So every month, 1 weekend in a month, they will go to that unit to train. 21 days in a year, they will go to what is called annual training to even do further training. And they're on standby. Whenever they are needed, they will be called upon. You saw what happened in Israel. At the beginning of Gaza, Hamas-Israeli war, Israel amassed a whole bunch of their reserve forces.
They call their reservists
from all over the globe.
Right.
And after a while, they had to deactivate them to go back home because such number was not sustainable. The economy couldn't carry that. And that's what Nigeria should begin to think about. But I'm not looking at it mostly on the perspective of just being in the armed forces. This could be a broad thing where they can equally do civil service like in the police or the
absolutely
or the fire services or the what's it called, national security, civil defense, so that every unit will be specialized. If civil defense needs more manpower, they can draw from those units that are trained to deal with issues that has to do with civil defense. If it's about fire, they can draw from those units, but you have to train them in specialized units. You have dental. For example, when we had COVID-19, right, there were medical units in U.S. reserve forces that were being activated to come and join regular doctors because they were not enough to cope with that medical emergency. We can have medical services units, dental services units, all of them on standby. At the slightest notice, they will be activated to respond to a specific national emergency. That is the way I am looking at it. You can train those who will be pilots. There are pilots in the reserves. You can train those who are
aeronautical engineers,
programmers, infantrymen. You can have all these people in different units, and whenever a specific national emergency need arises, they will respond. They will be activated by the parent service to come and boost their manpower level.
That's a very interesting point, Group Captain Shehu, because of course you were in the Air Force and you know a lot about, we were talking about aeronautical engineering, but you also talked about at the outset how military service really gives discipline to people and brings them up to a certain level. I mean, they acquire skills, civil response operations and that kind of thing. And at that young age, they'd probably not get that anywhere else.
Definitely. Other aspects that you will get, apart from the personal development, you get a citizen that is more patriotic. You get a citizen that is more attuned with Nigerian realities. And again, like Captain Bish said, it's another way. Having those kind of people is cheaper for the economy than having standing soldiers that are paid and accommodated throughout there. So it's like it's a cheap way of beefing your troops in case you want to. But again, I also align with him. Maybe the NYSC should be a hybrid, not necessarily. And,
hybrid force.
It's a hybrid force. The civil aspect should be there, but then these people should have. Now, what you are giving them is not really enough. You get the point. So it doesn't serve. And we've been talking of reserve. Several committees have this. We don't have reserve. But then again, if you go to reserve, do we even have the enough number of standing? But the reserve, it's a cheaper way of having your strength. And then without all the issues of accommodation, monthly pay and everything, you only bring them when you need them.
Right.
Yes.
But what about the issue of defense and protection? The people are saying that given the level of insecurity in Nigeria at the moment, that these are people who would then be trained and can be sent as part of that NYSC thing, having got that training, to their own communities, because that's the argument for state police, that those people would be more familiar with their own environment and would be able to protect and defend their environment. I mean, do you subscribe to that, or do you think that's maybe going a bit too far?
Well, for me, that would be going a bit too far, because you're talking about, what, 6 months training, and then you want to send them to go and defend their communities. Defend their communities from who? From kidnappers or bandits, or from external aggression? We have to really define what.
No, it would have to be internal insecurity.
Exactly. In that case, now you have to talk about training them in how to do normal police work, because there's a difference between.
But obviously, they'd be attached to the police as well. They wouldn't just go there.
Exactly. Just like he took it right up my mouth. It's called hybrid force. In which case, you're going to have some units that will specialize in military duties. You're going to have some units that specialize in policing, because soldiering and policing are two different things. They have different trainings, and so you have to train those people in those specific skills. But I have another idea that I wanted to add to it. There's been this constant call to adopt Peace Corps. I think they've passed through legislation twice. They were not able to be assented to. We can assent into that Peace Corps bill and make it Nigerian Peace Corps, whereby these people, instead of when they finish from NYSC, you discharge them into the wild. Because when they discharge them into the wild, a few things are going to happen. Is it that they japa to another country with the training that they've acquired here? Because a lot of people don't know that people go to school here in Nigeria almost at the expense of government. Because if you go to federal university, their tuitions are subsidized. It means that the government is actually paying a greater portion of their school fees. So after government does that, and you release, they went through the NYSC service, you release them into the wild, they jump out to another country without that training. Instead of doing that, you release them into the Nigerian Peace Corps. Within each geopolitical zones, we identified 6 critical skills that our economy needs to grow. Then we can build skills acquisition centers in each one of those geopolitical zones. Each geopolitical zone will specialize in one critical skill that is needed in this country. And then instead of releasing these people into the wild, release them into the Peace Corps. Let them go to those, skills acquisition centers and acquire those skills. While they're there in the Peace Corps, they will still be serving. That is another way to also look at this discussion that we're having now, because the discussion is mostly about how to reform the NYSC so that the country can get more from this program that we have been spending a whole bunch of money on since its inception, without actually achieving the main objective.
Really deriving much benefit.
Exactly, which is for them to go out there and experience other cultures, so that we can have national cohesion and stuff like that. But you can see that the country is more divided now than ever.
No, absolutely.
Meaning that even that NYSC program is not even achieving that objective. So these are things that can help us to see how we can build that national cohesion.
Okay.
The armed forces is one of those institutions that you can achieve cohesion, because when you're in the armed forces, it doesn't matter where anybody is from or what religion that person belongs to. Each person's life is dependent on the other person doing his job and doing it well. So it does not matter where you come from. So that national cohesion and unity that we're talking about can more easily be attained if we are going that direction.
What do you think, Group Captain Shehu? Because, I mean, he was talking about doing it under the umbrella of the NYSC, but using it, in other words, to make it more acceptable to people, just talking about let's reform the NYSC and then kind of put this in, you know, through, maybe not through the back door, but put it in such a way that it becomes part of this new core. Because I guess the question to ask is, what actually is the problem that we're seeking to address here? And one is obviously around military capability. I mean, military includes police and all the rest of it, yeah. The other one is the point that you made quite robustly at the outset, which is the issue of moral decay and irresponsibility in Nigeria, and the things that you can derive from military service, you know, to counter those things.
Yes, I'm happy. Even the British Prime Minister, you know, he said to give the youths a sense of direction, words like that. So, like I said, military service, you know, will give an individual that. And in this time where we have a lot of our youth going into drugs, you know, again,
Absolutely.
like you pointed, even with due respect, the current generation are more apart than we were. You get the point? So it is something that we should look into. However, with due respect, I have to slightly disagree with Captain Bish on this issue of the other civil, what is the name?
Nigeria Peace Corps.
Nigeria Peace Corps. You see, we have a military that right now is in need of reform, which has not been done. We have a police that is in need of reform. We have a civil defense where Oronsai report is saying even merge it with the police. So now to go and bring another, you have a police, to go and bring another, you know, another organ.
Yes.
Honestly, me, I'm not comfortable with an additional body now. Let's reform the ones that we have. All these agencies, I tell you, they need reforms. And the moral courage, or the political,
including the NYSC.
On the NYSC, they need reform. So why bring another reason? If we reform the NYSC, we can still get this compulsory military training or compulsory military service as we like. But again, in all the countries where you do this thing, unless the country is at war, there is always a kind of an optional clause, so that even if somebody receives the training, he is not compelled if he doesn't, because again, no matter how you dice it, some young men or young women are not really interested in serving this. But it is good for the country to make sure that they have that training, because if there is may God forgive, if there's any danger that threatens the existence of the country, everybody has to play his part, whether you are in the uniform or not. The country will have to haul you in to come and contribute your own quota.
And there are a lot of people who don't want to be to do NYSC, but they have to do it.
Yes, sure.
So that becomes incorporated as part of it. But let me ask you this, Captain Bish. I mean, is it possible, because Captain Shehu was talking about reforming the police and the army, and that's a very important thing, obviously. But if that reform doesn't take place, and then these NYSC people are funneled into the army, could this end up having a negative effect rather than having that sort of, you know, responsibility and moral strength and all the rest of it that you would normally get from the army? Because, I mean, we find a lot of people in the armed forces doing a lot of very untoward things.
Sure. You see, most militaries that have been successful are those militaries in which the personnel are all volunteer. You don't force them to go and serve.
It's a volunteer force.
It's a volunteer force, right? When you conscript them or you draft them or you force them, there's always a high death rate amongst those.
Well, that's what's happening in Ukraine.
Exactly,
right
because
a lot of them are being forced to go.
Exactly. So it has to be an all-volunteer thing, so that people will bring out their mind to serve. It shouldn't be a mandatory thing that you must do. But you can get the training. The training must be mandatory as part of the NYSC program. But as far as actual service, it shouldn't be mandatory. The reason why I brought up the issue of Nigerian Peace Corps is a way to dice it, to make it more palatable. Because like he rightly pointed out, there are some people that by the time you mention military service,
they don't want.
They will collapse. They don't want. Or you mention joint police, they don't want. They will just collapse. So that option, since we are talking about reforming the whole entire system, that option can be something that will be on the table. You know, let's look at maybe making it more like skills acquisition program, where they will go there and acquire skills that will be critical to our development.
Well, I think you said you can give them a range of options.
A range
Police,
of options.
Army, Air Force, Fire Service.
Yes. You know, even ICT.
Yeah.
If you look at what is happening in China right now, the developmental revolution that is taking place in China right now is because they focus in training their young people in critical skills that had made them to become very fantastic assets to national development. So we can look at it from that perspective as well. The reform must not tend towards having them serve in the armed forces or the police, although we are lagging behind in terms of having numerical strength in these areas. But it's an area that can be looked upon. So it's not only just, even the US that I said is about 50, in Israel is about 70%. In the UK, where you're from, is about 20.4.
This is where I'm from.
Where you were born.
Okay.
Yeah, where you were born is about 20.
I'm Nigerian like you are.
Exactly, I agree.
Don't take that away from me.
Exactly, I apologize. Their own is about 20.5%.
Yeah.
You know, so you discover it. Russia is about 40%. So you discover that most of all these superpowers, all of their military strength is not in the active service because they cannot sustain that numerical strength in active service. So that's why they have this alternative of having reserves that you only activate and pay when the need arises.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I think that's a very good idea. And Captain Shehu, I mean, this is also, I think the challenge, just listening to both of you, the challenge is to find a way to convince a lot of the young people that this would be good for them.
That is exactly the point.
So if you can, I think you're very good at that kind of thing. If you can convince them that it is a way of securing their future, given what we're seeing in Nigeria today, that Nigeria is on a precipice at the moment, as far as insecurity and that kind of thing is concerned, but also for their own personal development.
Exactly. So just like my colleague here said, instead of making it compulsory, rather what you do is to put incentives. Incentives in terms of skill, incentives in terms of marketability, incentives in terms of, you can even put some countries, they put what we call non-punitive sanctions. What is non-punitive sanctions? I've joined the military, I've done the compulsory service, you have done the compulsory service, you are an engineer, I am not going to serve. But when we go, the government will put policies that when we go seeking for employment, they will say those people that have done 3 years service, so they're given priority preference. When you go to, of course, in the UK and the US, you always see, are you a veteran?
Absolutely.
So that means if we have the same qualification, and we go for this, and me that served my 6 months or 1 year or whatever the case may be, I will get priority over you. So when you put this kind of incentives, because one of the the complaints that young people make, if they are the ones that don't want to go to serve in the military, they will say, taking 1 year or 6 months off, it's a break in my professional career in what I want to do, because I'm not going to be a soldier. But knowing that this thing in the long run is going to make him more marketable, but make him to come. So the system must find a way in what to do other countries to ensure that Mr. A, who decides to do that 6 months, by the time he finishes 6 months, Mr. B, who didn't do the 6 months, does not have advantage over him. And how do you do that? If the guy is a carpenter, even if he's a carpenter, you make sure by the time he comes, the highest qualification of carpenters in Nigeria, the military will have to find a way that by the time he's coming out, he has that. So he has not lost time.
So he gets a qualification.
He gets a qualification. So compared to the person who didn't serve. So it's only by system of incentives, because again, it is actually true, the modern world is about a all-volunteer force. If you come, in fact, in any case, the military is not the kind of work that you will force somebody to do it. We've started seeing it in NDA. There are people who force their children to go to NDA. Any career that is for NDA is not a way you are going to force your son to go and go there. And we have seen it. It is really happening in NDA. There are some parents who, because of pride or because of this ingenio, must go and be an officer.
Family tradition.
Gino doesn't want military service. So he will go and waste instructor's time, waste Nigeria's money, and finally Gino will be a very bad cadet or a very bad officer. So I mean, the issue of choice must always be there if you want the best out of a military personnel.
On that note, I want to thank you very much indeed. Group Captain Sadiq Shehu, who is also a national security consultant and a policy analyst, and of course, retired U.S. Army Captain Bish Johnson, who is also a security consultant. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now you can go home, because I know you've had a long day.
Thank you.